All right, thank you so much. Welcome to another episode of the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast. My name is Fred Diamond. Of course, I'm the author of Love, Hope, Lyme, what family members, partners, and friends who love a chronic Lyme survivor need to know. And I just want to make a note, this podcast does not promote any specific medical treatment and should not be seen as a replacement for medical advice. If you're a Lyme survivor or believe someone that you know has Lyme, please go seek proper medical treatment. But I'm very excited today. And I just want to remind people, if you're watching this on YouTube, go up and give us a thumbs up or give us a comment. We would appreciate that. The complete transcription is on the YouTube video. Or if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate that as well. Go give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate that. The book, Love, Hope, Lyme, what family members, partners, and friends who are the chronic Lyme survivor need to know, is available on Amazon. And Dr. Davey, I've been giving out the PDF of the book for free since its publication in 2022. We've given out close to 3,000 PDF copies of Love, Hope, Lyme. If somebody would like that copy, please feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find all throughout social media. And again, the book is on Amazon. If you'd like signed copies, again, please feel free to reach out to me via social media and we will get them to you as well. So I'm very excited for today's conversation. We're going to be talking about the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs, the CDMRP. And we're going to be talking to Dr. Angel Davey, and specifically, we're going to be talking about the Tick-Borne Disease Research Program. And Dr. Davey, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. I saw an amazing presentation that y'all had done as part of the Center for Lyme Action's presentation up on Capitol Hill in the summer of 2024. Previous guest of the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast was Colonel Malachowski. She also gave an unbelievable presentation on what she's gone through. I encourage everyone who's listening today to go up on YouTube or Apple and search for the episode with one of America's heroes, Colonel Nicole Malachowski, and talking about her story. So when I heard your presentation, I said, people need to know more about how Lyme disease and tick-borne diseases affect our military, our service professionals, and not just them, but their families. And we're going to be talking, as I mentioned, Megan Bradshaw from the Center for Lyme Action is going to be on the show in 2 weeks, and she's going to be talking about their fly-in, which basically is how we influence and educate people in Congress about the challenges that are Lyme disease and other tick-borne illnesses. All right, so I'm excited to get deep into this. So again, we have Dr. Angel Davey. Dr. Davey, give us an introduction to yourself, and then let's get specific about CDMRP and the Tick-Borne Disease Research Program.
Sure, of course. Yeah. So I've been with CDMRP since early 2013. I started here as a science officer. That's someone who manages research awards, then became a program manager and had the opportunity to stand up the Tick-Borne Disease Research Program. My transition here was fairly smooth from my postdoctoral fellowship, but throughout my academic career, I realized that I didn't necessarily want to be doing basic science bench research, but rather wanted to do something that was a little bit more impactful to patients without having to do that research myself. And so I feel like the CDMRP is a really great fit, and I've enjoyed my tenure here so far.
Very good. I know some of your background, you got some of your graduate work was at Penn State. So as a Philadelphian,
Yes.
I need to say we are.
Yes.
My daughter actually graduated from Penn State with her degree, and it's
Wonderful.
I'm glad to connect with you here. So the CDMRP,
Yeah.
the mission is to responsibly manage collaborative research that discovers, develops, and delivers healthcare solutions for service members, their families, veterans, and the American public. Give us a little deeper orientation into that, and then tell us about the Tick-Borne Disease Research Program and why that program was created.
Sure. Yeah. So before we kind of start getting into some of the information about the CDMRP and the Tick-Borne Disease Research Program, just as a federal employee, I need to make sure that I give that disclaimer that any opinions, interpretations, conclusions, recommendations, that sort of thing that I provide, those are mine, and I'm not necessarily speaking on behalf of the Department of Defense. But yeah. I'd love to give you just kind of a brief introduction about the CDMRP, the purpose of the CDMRP, and then get into the Tick-Borne Disease Research Program. So just really simply put, the CDMRP is an organization that manages research funds that those get specifically targeted or named by Congress and added to the DoD budget on a yearly basis. Congress first provided funding for the CDMRP back in 1992 with the first appropriation that established the breast cancer research program. So that was the first CDMRP appropriation. So similar to what you read, you're reading the CDMRP mission. CDMRP strives to fund innovative and impactful biomedical research, and that ranges from basic science all the way up through more complex clinical trials, depending on the program. And the goal of all CDMRP funded research is to transform healthcare in some way to benefit service members, their families, veterans, and the American public. And so a really important kind of hallmark that I'd like to point out is that patients, survivors, family members, caregivers, those folks are really the why for each CDMRP research program. And we make sure to incorporate their lived experience as a part of our two-tier review process. So those folks can serve as consumer reviewers, is what we call them. And they provide input right alongside scientists and clinicians during our peer and programmatic review procedures. So I think that's pretty unique among federal funding agencies and really important. And I mentioned that kind of two-tier review process. That's also perhaps a little different than what folks might be familiar with. But the whole point of that two-tier review process is to kind of balance really meritorious, scientifically meritorious research projects with projects that maybe best fulfill the goals and needs of each program as set forth by that program in their funding opportunities. So that's kind of, I guess, some key things that I would highlight about CDMRP overall. Happy to hop into the Tick-Borne Disease Research Program if you like.
So when I was reading the report, it said that nearly 7,000 service members received a diagnosis of tick-borne disease, and 63,000 non-service member beneficiaries, families, I presume, were diagnosed. This was between 2006 through 2022. How prevalent is Lyme and other tick-borne diseases in the military? Why might military personnel and their families be at a high risk of getting tick-borne diseases? And then put that back into context about the Tick-Borne Disease Research Program.
Yeah, of course. I can certainly do that. So yeah, I think some of the numbers that you just cited came from the Armed Forces Health Surveillance Division. And that data, the 7,000 service members and over 63,000 beneficiaries that spanned like a 16-year period that ended in 2022. Also really important to note is that Lyme disease accounted for nearly 80% of those tick-borne disease diagnoses and over 40% of all vector-borne disease diagnoses. And we also use the term reportable tick-borne diseases. So what does that mean in terms of this particular report? So that just includes Lyme disease, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, ehrlichiosis, babesiosis, Bartonellosis, tularemia, tick-borne viral encephalitis, and Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever. So obviously there may be occurrences of other tick-borne illnesses and conditions within the military that aren't captured by that particular data set, right? I think we're all familiar with some other conditions as well. And I think you kind of asked the question why military personnel may be at higher risk of getting tick-borne diseases. And I mean, simply put, I think the training and operating environments around the world that may have heavy brush or vegetation, and just, by virtue of being in those outdoor environments, for significant amounts of time, I think that is definitely contributing to increasing risk. Military combat uniforms, they are treated with insect repellent, permethrin. Of course, that repellency does not last indefinitely, right?
So I want to ask a quick question. A lot of people to this day, again, we're doing today's interview towards the end of 2024, and the show is being posted in 2025. We still hear from not just military, but non-military people, basic people who get Lyme disease in Texas or Southern California, anywhere around the United States and many places around the world. A doctor will say to them, "You don't have Lyme because Lyme doesn't exist here," or "We don't get Lyme in North Carolina." To refer back to Colonel Malachowski's. Do we see military personnel and their beneficiaries getting Lyme in multiple places? It's not just in mid-Atlantic or Northeast or New England.
Yeah, I mean, so that data that that we were talking about from the Armed Forces Health Surveillance Division, I don't recall seeing a breakdown of that geographically. It may exist. I definitely don't kind of have that at the tip of my tongue. But I'm assuming it's covering across all geographical regions where we have military installations. But certainly we could do a follow-up on that.
Yeah, I know it happens all over the place. I've spoken to military personnel all over the world, and many, of course, all through the United States. Colonel Malachowski, believes she got bitten in North Carolina, where there's a
Right.
lot of military, if you will. You mentioned beneficiaries. Why is it important that beneficiaries are considered as part of this program?
Yeah, of course. So, the families of service members, they're at risk for tick bite and potential tick-borne disease, just like anyone in the general population, right? Um, we talk about this risk continuing to grow with these geographically expanding tick populations. We're seeing new emerging tick-borne pathogens. So again, that increased risk for families of service members is just like for everyone else. But I would say that if a family member, such as a parent, a spouse, a child, is experiencing challenges that are associated with tick-borne illness, that's definitely it has the potential to impact the service member's ability to conduct their job duties, right? And I think we can say that that's true for any disease or condition that a military family is dealing with. But the tick-borne disease research findings and the developments that may result, that are specific to military personnel, that can always be extended to, and it can help the American public.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, we're going to be featuring in 2 weeks Megan Bradshaw from the Center for Lyme Action on the Love Hope Lyme podcast. And the overall mission of the Center for Lyme Action is to grow federal funding for tick-borne disease research, treatment, and care, from the federal government agencies. What are some of the priorities in the recent rounds of funding? And can you give us a little bit of a peek into, for people who don't know, how federal programs get funding?
Yeah. So, maybe let me kind of start with that backstory of how this federal funding comes about, and I can kind of tell you how the Tick-Borne Disease Research Program was started, and then we can hop into kind of the current research priorities. But Congress first established the Tick-Borne Disease Research Program in FY16. It started with a $5 million appropriation. The genesis was it was all largely due to the efforts of Lyme disease advocates. They worked really tirelessly with the Congressional Lyme Disease Caucus to push for CDMRP funding for tick-borne disease research in the 2016 Defense Appropriations Act. That particular group cited tick-borne diseases as a threat to service members and their families, and just in general called for better diagnostics and studies of both acute and chronic disease processes. So that's kind of how it starts with the appropriation. And then, as an organization, we have to decide, well, how are we best going to execute that appropriation, in the most appropriate way? So we convened a meeting of stakeholders at that time. So there were representatives from government, academia, nonprofits, industries. We had the consumers that I mentioned earlier, just a breadth of folks from across the field of tick-borne diseases. And so that gave an opportunity for the attendees to kind of share their perspectives on what the most pressing needs were for the program to address. And anyone that's familiar with the field of tick-borne diseases knows that there are many needs, right? Spanning a range of tick-borne diseases. There are, various bacterial, viral, parasitic pathogens that cause these conditions. And then, of course, there's such a range of impacts on the body, many different body systems. Neurological concerns, you mentioned Dr. Bransfield earlier, cardiac impacts on immune function, all of those sorts of things to consider. So, that's kind of how it started. But from that first year, FY16, and based on the initial stakeholders meeting and then the subsequent vision setting meeting that we had, we've kind of developed and stuck with sort of these four main areas of research that we've been looking to fund over the years. So first area is understanding the cellular and molecular pathogenesis of tick-borne diseases. Developing measures of prevention, super important. That's kind of the first line item to consider. Improving tick-borne disease detection and diagnosis, and then developing new and effective treatments as well. And so I mentioned vision setting. That's something we do every single year. It helps the program to keep on track with what the most current and critical needs are in the field of tick-borne disease research. And to do that, we engage with what we call a programmatic panel. And again, just like with that stakeholders meeting, we have pretty broad representation there from folks that are knowledgeable in the field, people from the NIH, CDC, FDA. We have representation from a part of the Armed Forces Health Surveillance Division that's called the DoD's Global Emerging Infections Surveillance Section, or GEIS, as well as representation from academia and consumer advocacy organizations. So having kind of input from folks with all these various backgrounds really helps to ensure that we're aiming to fund that innovative and impactful research to really try to meet the needs of those affected by tick-borne diseases.
That's a great answer. And actually, there are so many different places where Lyme disease needs to be funded, and like you mentioned, treatment and understanding, and then ongoing care. I did a couple podcasts with people from the Global Lyme Alliance, and one of their three big focuses is on mental health as it relates to Lyme disease, because there's so much that can happen when you're constantly treating yourself and nothing happens, right? And you go into remission, and then you go back where the disease pops itself up again. I'm just kind of curious, are tick-borne diseases taken seriously in the military? Is Lyme disease recognized by the military medical community? And that's not intended to be like a insulting or derisive question. It's more Lyme in general. A lot more people are becoming aware of it. There's been some instances in the news. Again, we're doing today's interview in December of 2024, where Lyme disease has continued to become a top of news story. How is it? Would you describe its seriousness being taken of in military medical circles?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can speak from, again, just from my perspective of what I learned. Since at CDMRP, we're not actually like administering any sort of medical care or anything like that. We're just looking to fund research to help in that space. But definitely, I am aware that starting in, I think, 2009, there's a publication called the Medical Surveillance Monthly Report. It's a peer-reviewed journal of the Armed Forces Surveillance Division that I keep talking about. It's called the MSMR for short. They published several articles pertaining to Lyme and other tick-borne diseases. mainly that publication, it deals with looking at like incidence, distribution, impact, trends of illness and injuries among service members and other beneficiaries in the military health system. But anyway, the latest relevant MSMR report was published in February of 2018, and that noted that Lyme disease was the most common confirmed vector-borne disease among the U.S. Armed Forces. And of course, that's consistent with CDC surveillance reports that the disease is also the most common vector-borne disease in the United States. So that's kind of one thing that I can share. I also do know that the DoD years back developed something called MilTick. It's a tick identification or infection confirmation kit for testing ticks that have bitten people to determine health risks associated with the bite. And, importantly, those test results can then provide some sort of actionable evidence that can be used by clinicians to determine what the best course of treatment would be. They also use that MilTick data to assess the risk of tick-borne diseases at specific military installations and monitor changes in regional tick-borne disease risk. So I think that says something, certainly. I did just read, I just found this out. MilTick was expanded in July of 2024 with a new program called Surveillance for Understudied Rare and Emerging Pathogens, or SurePath for short. And that's kind of this way to monitor emerging tick-borne disease threats that might not yet be included on what, we were talking about, that standard reportable tick-borne disease list. And then just one more sort of military aligned resource, I guess, that I could mention, or effort, is that the Walter Reed Biosystematics Unit maintains something called VectorMap. It's a database that provides disease maps and mapped collection data and distribution models for various arthropod disease vector species. So it includes mosquitoes, ticks, sandflies, mites, fleas, all of those things, as well as the hosts and reservoirs of the vector-borne disease pathogens. So, certainly ticks are being represented there as well.
Yeah. So before I ask you for your final thoughts, again, we talked today with Dr. Angel Davey, Congressionally directed medical research programs, the Tick-Borne Disease Research Program. Dr. Davey, I want you to put this in context for us. Just for, not everybody knows this, but I do a lot of work with companies that bring solutions to military, Department of Defense. I work with a lot of companies that sell solutions to federal government agencies, and have a lot of exposure. I'm based in Fairfax, Virginia, in Northern Virginia, where obviously military, Department of Defense is such a huge part of our environment ecosystem. So much is invested in military personnel to protect our country, to protect the citizens. It's, for not everybody who's listening who understands that, it's remarkable. The people who are in the military and committing their lives to service, etc. Talk about the impact on military personnel if they have chronic Lyme.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it can vary person to person, right? There could be a range of impacts on service members' health, and that's going to then impact their ability to perform their job duties, whatever those may be. Through their involvement in peer review for the Tick-Borne Disease Research Program, I have met former and current military personnel impacted by tick-borne illness. You mentioned retired Colonel Malachowski. She and another individual certainly come to mind when you ask this question. Both of these folks that come to mind are former pilots diagnosed with tick-borne illness during their time of service, and because of the impacts of the disease, they're unable to fly any longer, and they've been medically retired from service. So, lots of years in training and whatnot. And they're no longer able to continue forward with that. I do know with these two folks in particular, and I'm sure others as well, they still do experience cognitive and other impacts related to their tick-borne illness. That's going to impact quality of life. They've had a journey along the way in terms of trying to obtain medical diagnosis and treatment. That's super challenging on the individual and their family. I would say that both of the folks that I'm alluding to, Colonel Malachowski and another individual, they have been featured under the consumer stories section of the Tick-Borne Disease Research Program webpage. Like, if folks would be interested to go on there and kind of read their stories in a little more detail, if you have not heard the stories thus far.
Good. Do you have the URL for that website? I know I have cdmrp.health.mil. Is that a good place for people to go?
That's perfect. Yes. Thank you for providing that. Yeah. And it's pretty easy from there to then just go to the research programs drop down and choose the Tick-Borne Disease Research Program. Yeah.
Good. So I want to thank Dr. Angel Davey for being on today's Love Hope Lyme podcast. I want to acknowledge you for the great work. You know, there's so much work that we've all learned needs to continue happening in the chronic Lyme world and the tick-borne disease world, and all the work you're doing is just remarkable. So I just want to acknowledge you and the organization and the team for all of that. Any final thoughts? Anything that we haven't covered that you want to share that you make sure you get across?
Yeah, just a couple of things, I guess. The primary thing that I want to let everybody know, and I talked about this earlier, but CDMRP incorporates input from consumers into our program priorities, into our funding strategy, our funding recommendations. And, you know, really since the beginning of the Tick-Borne Disease Research Program, our consumer peer and programmatic reviewers have demonstrated an expertise that really can only be provided by those who've lived experience with tick-borne illness. And it's super important to have that perspective to kind of level set everything. And again, those folks are working collaboratively with clinicians and scientists to keep on building and improving the program even after we initially set it up. So what I wanted to say is that if anyone listening is involved with a related tick-borne disease advocacy organization, outreach or support organization, and they would be interested in participating in peer review in particular for the Tick-Borne Disease Research Program, I would encourage you to visit the CDMRP website and click on the Consumers tab, and you can learn there about how to apply. And then just a couple other resource type things on the webpage, and I'll leave you with that. But there's also a research programs tab. As I mentioned, you can click the link to the Tick-Borne Disease Research Program page for more info on the program overall. And there's also a search awards and publications tab where you can search for awards that the program has funded each year since FY16, if you're curious about the types of work that we have supported.
All right, very good. And you can find those links on the show notes and on the YouTube description as well. All right, once again, I would thank Dr. Angel Davey for being on today's Love Hope Lyme podcast. My name is Fred Diamond.